Grateful to be alive. Relief for the Brits who've made it out of Sudan and back to the UK. Those who got on the military flights to Cyprus landed in Stansted today, happy to be safe, but reliving terrible memories of what they'd left behind.
We can open the door freely like anytime, and anytime something can happen.
It's difficult, like loads of gunshots, people just dying, like dead bodies on the streets.
Well, tonight the government has confirmed over 500 Brits have now been brought out, but with hundreds more waiting, with time pressure growing. There is just one day before a fragile ceasefire is due to end. Also on News at 10 tonight. After Dominic Raab, now Health Secretary Steve Barkley faces allegations of bullying. Did women die at the hands of the jailed breast surgeon Ian Patterson? Why hundreds of cases could now be investigated.
De Bruyne shoots! Oh, brilliant!
Man City sweep Arsenal aside, an inch ever closer to another Premier League title, and paging history from Galileo, Darwin and hundreds more, the treasure trove of letters going online.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. The relief and the tears on their faces told something of what they had been through and their happiness at being home. The first plane load of British nationals to make it back from war-ravaged Sudan touched down at Stansted Airport in Essex and into the welcoming embraces of relatives and friends. Getting them from Cyprus to the UK is not, of course, the hard bit. That's evacuating people from Sudan itself. So far, 536 out of a possible 4,000 have been picked up. There is now a race to fly in and get many more, with just one day of the three-day ceasefire left. Military chiefs have, however, told the Prime Minister they can evacuate another 500 people each day for as long as they need to.
Not just the end of two long flights, the end of an ordeal lasting for some almost 2 weeks. The first charter flight bringing British evacuees from Sudan, touching down at Stansted. Whether they could have been brought home quicker, no longer an issue after what they'd lived through.
And the house is just shaking, and we sleep on the floor, and we can't stand near the windows, and we can open the door freely like anytime, and anytime something can happen.
I think it was a big relief. It was a big relief, yeah. Yeah, we heard the news that the evacuation is starting, so we just went, and it was a couple of hours before we were told that we were getting to the flight, and it went very smooth.
The route to Stansted and safety passes through Larnaca Airport in Cyprus. The air bridge bringing more evacuees by military transport this afternoon. 79 on this flight, one of 6 so far. As they wait for onward transit by charter to the UK, some told us of the perilous journey even to get to the evacuation point.
Through looting zones, through dangerous terrains, just to get to the military base, which was a big risk to take my family on, and making that risk was a big decision because it can go either way, you know. Either you make it or you don't make it. There's no in between.
Going through the dark, we had slight chance of getting hit. There was a bullet that wheezed right next to me in the streets before I went through.
If all 6 of the rescue flights do make it out today, that could be as many as 1,000 people evacuated. That is still only a quarter of the number who may need help. And with 2 days of a fragile 3-day ceasefire already gone. As the C-130 transport plane headed back to RAF Akrotiri to prepare for another long journey south, the brigadier running the Sudan evacuation defended both the speed and the timing of his operation.
In the very early stages of fighting, where it's very complicated, intense, and we don't know what is happening, in particular, we don't know who might be in control of things that are a threat to an aircraft, that, in my professional military judgment, is not the right time to be asking lots of people to move. In my judgment, this is the right time, and I support fully the Prime Minister's decision to call this evacuation now.
Through tonight and tomorrow, under the watchful eye of the Royal Marines, the air bridge from Khartoum will continue. But it is the last day of the fragile ceasefire, and if everyone doesn't get out, there will be questions about the judgments made by British officials. James Mace, News at 10, Cyprus.
Well, for those still in Sudan, ceasefire or no ceasefire, it remains, of course, a terrifying place. At least 459 people, including civilians and fighters, have been killed and over 4,000 wounded since fighting began last week. So no wonder there are large crowds of foreigners and Sudanese who've made it all the way to Port Sudan, waiting to be ferried to safety. Crowds of families have also been growing at Sudan's crossing with Egypt, while at least 20,000 refugees have fled across the border into Chad and nearly 4,000 into South Sudan, with others reported to have arrived already in the Central African Republic and Ethiopia.
Sudan ceasefire has only 24 hours left, and so far it's meant that the streets of Khartoum have been largely empty and quiet. And yet that peace remains fragile, with plumes of smoke still rising above the city. And most people are still too frightened to venture out. Those that do lament at how their city has been left in ruin. We're fed up. We're too afraid to go out, this woman said. We're going to die in our homes. And cursing the leaders of the warring factions, she said, the whole of Sudan is praying against you. Coenda Al-Sir said that whilst the ceasefire is the time to go out, there were no services. This is the third such truce, he said, but people aren't assured. This morning there was gunfire and the sound of other weapons. Whether the ceasefire holds or not, people of all nationalities are already trying to get on board anything to escape. And this is what Britons will face if they can't get on one of the RAF planes. One such route is Port Sudan. This boat, sent by Saudi Arabia, was taking people to Jeddah. The French battleship Lorraine docked too, taking UN personnel. And it's not just ships that headed to Port Sudan. An Indian Air Force plane landed to take citizens back home. The other main route is to the Egyptian border, a road journey that could take up to 3 days. And even when you reach it, there is already a 3-day backlog to process people. For many European countries, its mission almost accomplished. For Britain, it remains a race against time.
Most Western powers operating out of Djibouti are winding down their operations because they've got their nationals out. For Britain to catch up, they need to have the ceasefire hold in Sudan. Otherwise, British citizens will have to find their own way out, and that means heading to the border.
There are two parts to this tragic story. One is the frantic Western efforts to airlift their citizens to safety. The other are the millions of Sudanese for whom escape is not a possibility and who face a future dominated by the prospects of more war.
And Raggy joins us now. Raggy, when we heard from you last night, there were concerns, of course, over this ceasefire, but with pressure mounting, not least on that British operation, what hope of this ceasefire staying in place as long as it's supposed to, and any potential of it even outlasting the 72 hours?
Well, on the first point, Julie, I think it's very, very dicey. We're hearing from those eyewitnesses in my report that even though the truce holds, there has been sporadic gunfire and plumes of smoke within Khartoum city. But in terms of extending it, that is a possibility. I would be very, very surprised if within Washington and particularly in London, there weren't diplomatic moves to pressure both sides to extend the ceasefire. I think also on the other side of the warring factions, it is bizarrely in their interest for the Westerners to leave because they don't want any external eyewitnesses to what is happening within Sudan. And I'm sad to say that the momentum within the political dynamics of Sudan is that this conflict will continue. I don't think you're dealing with two parties which are in any way beholden to any international sort of norms of war, and Sudan has been descending into this for quite a while.
It's a chilling thought, Raggy. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. Well, there will, it seems, be no extra help for Sudanese people wanting to come to Britain to escape the fighting. Not yet, anyway. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, said she had no plans to make special provision for them. This evening, she got her illegal migration bill through the House of Commons, despite angering some MPs by saying many migrants crossing the Channel get involved in crime. The bill will change the law so that those who arrive here illegally will be detained and then quickly removed.
Stop the boats, a simple slogan, but one that was causing plenty of controversy today, and some awkward questions for the government. What if the boats were carrying a child refugee from Sudan? When that was put to the Prime Minister in the Commons, he sidestepped the question.
Will he therefore confirm that it would be his government's intention to detain and deport a child refugee who flees Sudan and comes to the United Kingdom?
This country has a proud record of compassionately supporting those who need our assistance.
Order. The ayes to the right, 289. The noes to the left, 230.
The bill passed easily as rebel amendments were withdrawn, but problems could still lie ahead. The government avoided a major rebellion tonight by offering concessions when the bill is debated in the House of Lords. But nevertheless, there are Conservative backbenchers who are extremely worried about the impact of the bill on refugees seeking sanctuary here and on Britain's reputation in the wider world. The former Prime Minister, Theresa May, warned it would make human trafficking worse.
I believe it will consign victims to remain in slavery. The government will be ensuring that more people will stay enslaved and in exploitation.
And the former Attorney General said it set a dangerous precedent.
That a Minister of the Crown will deliberately disobey the international law obligations of this country. Isn't that really the effect of what is being asked?
But what do refugees think? Joel, who's gay, came here 4 years ago from Nigeria and was granted asylum. He says under the new law he'd be sent home.
I think that would be the case, sadly, and that is just beyond sad. It's I don't know, where is our humanity?
What would happen to you if you did get sent back to Nigeria?
People like myself, we do not stand a chance, not ifs, buts or maybes. We are usually killed or, locked up.
The government says it has plans for legal routes to claim asylum, but has yet to explain what they are. Libby Vina, News at 10, Westminster.
5 days on from the resignation of Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister, over his behaviour towards his civil servants, Anushka has details of a complaint against another. The Health Secretary, Steve Barkley, and Anushka's on the Patterson set ahead of tonight's show. Hello to you, Anushka. How serious are these claims? What have you learned?
Well, myself and my colleague Lucy McDade have been hearing stories from sources in different parts of the health sector over recent weeks regarding to the behaviour of Steve Barkley. People have used words like bullying. We were continuing to investigate that, but then today The Guardian came out with a story that suggested that informal concerns had been raised with the most senior civil servant in the department, the permanent secretary. Now, I should say that the Department of Health denies that there has been any bullying. They say there have been no formal complaints, that Steve Barkley hasn't been talked to about his behaviour. But clearly, following on from Dominic Raab, these are more serious questions for people who are very close to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. On the other hand, I have had a call this evening from a civil servant who said they worked very closely with Steve Barkley and they had never seen anything that they would describe as bullying. And they said there was a concern in government that what might happen is that ministers themselves, because of these complaints, would feel more nervous about the way they behave and perhaps even not have officials in the room. Although when I asked them if there was evidence of that, they said not yet. There's going to be lots more discussion on this on Patterson later that viewers can watch after the news.
OK, and separately, just another issue tonight, Anushka. Word tonight of increasing tensions between the Royal College of Nursing and the Health Secretary.
Yeah, there's a pretty big legal clash between the government and the Royal College of Nursing tomorrow over a strike that is starting on Sunday night. It's a 48-hour strike, and the question is whether the Tuesday, the last day, is actually legal. The government says it's not. Pat Cullen from the RCN, I've seen witness evidence from her tonight. She's going to argue that it is legal, but she clearly does think that the government is likely to win. They will curtail that strike, but it is leading to big tension. Steve Barkley writing tonight to call the RCN to pull back, but the RCN saying that their members are getting very angry about this and could then vote for further strikes in the future. OK, Anushka, we will see you later. Thank you very much indeed for that.
The crimes of the breast cancer surgeon Ian Patterson, who carried out unnecessary operations, still haunt those of his victims who survived. Inquests into the deaths of 27 of those who did not have already opened. Patterson treated thousands of women. Now more deaths could be reviewed and eventually added to the list of those who may have died after he performed surgery on them.
It's 19 years since Matthew Jones lost his mother to breast cancer. She died in 2004, aged 47, 2 years after she was operated on by the now jailed breast surgeon Ian Patterson. Now the coroner has opened an inquest into the death of Eunice Jones to establish whether that treatment had any part to play.
It's almost as if she's died all over again. And whilst you never get over losing your mother, I would say we've healed. But now we're reliving everything all over again.
Ian Patterson was jailed in 2017 for carrying out unnecessary operations in private hospitals on some people who didn't even have cancer. But in the NHS, he was found to be performing incomplete mastectomies. Police officer Marie Pinfield died in 2008 after her breast cancer spread. An inquest was opened into her death in 2020, but her sister told me today that it won't be heard in court until at least the end of next year.
Marie should have lived for another 10 years after that treatment and where she was in, like with her cancer. Wow. And so I feel like I've been robbed of my sister for all those years. And now I'm in a void space that, I have no clue what's going on.
The coroner has opened 27 inquests into the deaths of Ian Patterson's former patients, but said today that many more records are being looked at. In the NHS, 1,206 patients had a mastectomy by Ian Patterson. We know at least 675 of those patients have died. But in the private sector, he saw 6,500 patients, and we know at least 1,000 of those have died as well. Former Patterson patient Debbie Douglas wants more transparency about which patients are being reviewed.
For me, all the deaths should be looked at. But ultimately, there were 15 recommendations from the inquiry, and ultimately they need to be implemented because, yes, there are other Pattersons out there, and yes, it's going to happen again if they're not implemented.
Patterson has always maintained his innocence.
Mr. Patterson, have you got anything to say to your former patients?
But if the coroner finds his treatment to be more than minimally to blame for the deaths of any of his patients, there could be much more serious questions to answer. Stacey Foster, News at 10, Solihull.
The Chinese leader Xi Jinping has spoken by phone to Ukraine's President Zelensky for the first time since the Russian invasion. President Xi wants to send a peace negotiator to Ukraine to try to end the fighting with Russia. President Zelensky said the call had been long and meaningful. There was no mention of the invasion in Chinese state media's account of the call, and rather ominously it stated there is no winner in a nuclear war. Now, Prince Harry's latest court case against a newspaper produced another unexpected allegation today. In court papers, the Prince claimed Piers Morgan knew about illegal information gathering when he was editor of the News of the World. Rebecca's been in court again today. I mean, so many lines coming out of this, Rebecca, but we learned that other members of the royal family allegedly hacked by the papers too today.
Yeah, Prince Harry was watching via video link from LA today as more details about alleged hacking and blagging at The Sun and the News of the World were revealed in court papers. It's alleged that in the mid-90s, The Sun even intercepted the phone calls and messages of Charles, now King Charles, and Camilla, the Queen Consort. Prince Harry says that his own private information would have been accessed too as a result. Court papers also name Piers Morgan, who was editor of the News of the World in 1994, as being among those who knew about, encouraged and concealed unlawful activity. The document lists several articles about Princess Diana, which were published whilst Piers Morgan was editor, allegedly obtained through unlawful information gathering. We also saw emails which reveal that the Queen gave her full authority for Prince Harry to pursue Rupert Murdoch's news group because she knew the scale and effect of hacking and surveillance on her family. Newsgroup newspapers want this struck out. They say the claim's been brought too late. A judge will decide if it proceeds to trial.
OK, Rebecca, thank you for keeping across all of this for us. Thank you. One fascinating thing about a coronation is how, as a marker in time, it illustrates how the world has changed. Since the last one, by way of proof, a top Irish Republican politician will be at the service. Sinn Féin's leader in the suspended Stormont Assembly, Michelle ONeill, has accepted an invitation. The woman who would be Northern Ireland's First Minister when Stormont eventually resumes said even though she was a Republican, she wanted to represent the whole community.
20 years ago, this heartfelt moment would have been an impossibility. A handshake between Sinn Féin's Vice President Michelle ONeill and the new King following Queen Elizabeth's death. In September, another big step. Irish Republican politicians attended a service for Queen Elizabeth at St Anne's Cathedral in Belfast. Days later, they were present in Westminster for her funeral. Now, another significant gesture. Sinn Féin's leader in Northern Ireland will attend the coronation. A moment to reach out, she says.
This is about relationships between our islands and the people who live on our islands. So for me, this is one of those moments in time again that is a time to be respectful and for me to fulfil my commitment as First Minister for all.
What would you say to people who would see your attendance at the coronation as you breaking faith with them and your political beliefs?
I am an Irish Republican. There are many Irish Republicans in our society, but equally there are many people who look towards the monarchy. And whenever I have said that I'd be a First Minister for all, I think it's important that we're respectful, and particularly given the changing times in which we live in, when a lot of things are changing around us, let's be respectful of each other. Let's demonstrate that respect every day in our words and our deeds, and let's be mature and civil in our politics.
Michelle ONeill has followed in the footsteps of her predecessor, Martin McGuinness, who made history with this meeting in 2012. That moment paved the way for many more exchanges. Reconciliation after the IRA, which McGuinness once led, killed her cousin Lord Mountbatten, the new King's beloved mentor. May 6th marks a new era for the monarchy and a time when old enemies will continue to forge new friendships. Tracy McGee, News at 10, Belfast.
The mighty Microsoft Corporation's appetite for expansion has been blocked by the UK's competition regulator. Microsoft has been told it cannot buy the gaming firm Activision, creators of Call of Duty and Candy Crush, because it would stifle competition. Activision took aim at the regulator, claiming the decision proved the UK is clearly closed for business in its view. Well, Joel's here, and I mean, this was one heck of a deal. Just take us through this story.
Yeah, it took aim at the regulator, it took aim at the government a little bit, Julie, as well. Look, Microsoft, biggest tech company on the planet, wants to buy Activision, one of the biggest games makers on the planet, the titles that you've been listing. The Competition and Markets Authority has blocked the deal on the grounds that it's not in the interest of gamers. On the face of it, what are they worrying about? I mean, if you look at the stats here, Microsoft's Xbox only accounts for 27% of installed game consoles. Sony, as you can see there, the biggest player in the market and by far. But the CMA's worry is this. Look at this. The way we're playing games is changing. 60% of the market, as the animation will tell us here, is on mobile phones, far more than on consoles or PCs. And it's cloud gaming at the bottom there that's the problem. A tiny 1% of the market, but growing fast. What is cloud gaming? I hear some of our viewers ask. Well, cloud gaming, as you well know, Julie Etchingham, is live streaming games on a mobile phone, a PC, in much the same way over the internet as we would do a film on Netflix or something like this. Now, the technology is in its infancy, but the CMA believes that Microsoft is in a leading position, and owning Activision's games would allow Microsoft effectively to stifle competition, to make the games exclusive to its cloud services platform. Microsoft is livid, points out it's never had more than 5,000 cloud game users in the whole of the UK at any one time. Activision hasn't taken this terribly well either. In a statement, it says the report's conclusions are a disservice to UK citizens who face, get this, increasingly dire economic prospects. We will reassess our growth plans for the UK, it warns. Global innovators note the UK clearly closed for business. So, what happens next? The deal isn't dead yet. They plan to appeal. Note, though, regulators in the EU and the US have yet to approve the takeover. Activision share price down 11% today. If this deal fails, Microsoft has to pay a fine of £2 billion. The stakes are high.
They certainly are. Joel, thank you very much indeed for taking us through all of that. Thank you. Now, it's early in the year, but the temperatures in Spain this week are expected to reach 40 degrees Celsius. It was already pretty warm there today, nearly 30 degrees in Madrid. If it does reach 40, it'll be the hottest April temperature in Spain since records began. Now, if it was the defining match of the Premier League season, it was a pretty one-sided decider. Manchester City won tonight's top-of-the-table clash against Arsenal 4-1 to put themselves in a strong position to become champions again. City were slicker in just about every department. By the end, they could even afford to let their hair down.
Mathematically, it might not be a season-defining game, but in every other way, for the fans especially, it feels very much like it. Arsenal within touching distance of a first Premier League title for 19 years, and Manchester City still on course for an elusive League, FA Cup and Champions League treble.
Most likely this game is very important to us and we really need to win for us to know that we're going to be staying on top.
And do you think they will win?
Well, no chance, no chance. She knows it.
If we win tonight, we'll run away with it. I think they'll buckle, yeah? Once we win, they'll buckle. If it's a draw, it's still up for grabs.
City at home, on form, and in recent weeks reeling in stuttering Arsenal's lead at the top of the table.
Tough night for Arsenal fans. Finally, there are so many ways that knowledge is shared these days, particularly online, of course. Hundreds of years ago, the exchange of ideas often relied on letters between the big brains of the age. Now, those private notes from scientists like Sir Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin are to be made public.
In the depths of the Royal Society basement, they're opening up the vaults to nearly 400 years of scientific history. Among the treasures, notes from eminent scientists like Isaac Newton, and this one from Benjamin Franklin, the first person to fly a kite in 1752.
Tie the corners of the handkerchief to the extremities of the cross, so you have the body of a kite.
250,000 pages of historical material have now been digitised for the modern age, including this letter from the astronomer Galileo in the year 1613.
This project will be a real benefit to historians of science and other disciplines across the world. So instead of having to visit the Royal Society, physically come into the collections to find manuscript material that they may want to look at, researchers will be able to look at them from wherever they are in the world. So at the touch of a button on a laptop, they'll be able to see over 350 years of scientific achievement, and that's quite something.
The project, which has taken more than a decade, means the scientific works will now be available for the first time on the Royal Society website, including this illustration, which may look like an ink splodge, but is in fact what William Herschel thought the galaxy looked like in 1785.
It's not just the text that's important, but it's also the pictures, the illustrations, how scientists saw the world and tried to communicate it to a wider audience.
4 centuries of history now placed online. An incredible archive for the world to see. Layla Hayes, News at 10.
And that's it for tonight from all the team here. Good night, and we will see you tomorrow.